Welcome to toy-polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi, and today we're going to be looking at a few sort of fixes on some Transformers G1 mini bots. Now these were recently sent to me, or most of these were sent to me by Michael Schaefer, and actually a lot of them are in very nice condition, but there are a couple that have some issues, and I also had one that was in my collection that had some sort of major bits broken off it, so I thought it'd be fun just to do some sort of little fixes on them, not really a sort of a whole restoration, just repairing them so that they are sort of ready to be displayed. So this is sort of what I have in my collection now. Michael very kindly sent me a whole load of them, and one of them was this G1 Bumblebee. Now I don't actually have a G1 Bumblebee in my collection, so I was quite sort of pleased to get it, but I noticed sort of on closer inspection that part of his foot is broken. You can see there there's actually a piece of yellow plastic missing. If we look on the other side, you can see there's this hook that holds the foot on. On this side it is snapped off, so this foot actually sort of falls away very easily. But I'm sort of thinking it looks like it's possible to fix that. I've never tried it before, so you know, that's going to be quite an interesting challenge. And I think just fixing that and tightening up some of the loose joints, you can see he's got very loose hands, would make this Bumblebee quite displayable. Obviously we can replace the little stickers and emblems as well. I've got some replacements of those. So that's one of the jobs we can do, try and see if we can repair the broken little latch on the foot there. Actually you can see it clearly if I show you from the top, it's missing on that side. So that's one of the jobs. The other one is, Michael sent me this very nice Brawn, but the one I have in my collection is this poor chap. I picked him up at a carboot sale many years ago, and as you can see one of his arms has snapped off, and also one of his feet has snapped off, so you can't actually stand him up. And you know, both of these things look like they should be fixable, and with some of the sort of the knowledge I've got recently for fixing other toys, I thought I would have a go at trying to repair these two and see if they can be made to be displayable again. I'll also do a bit of a clean up on some of the other figures, and as you can see on ones like Cliff Jumper here, the logo is completely worn away, so we'll replace that. But really it's just going to be a case of trying to do some fixes that I've never tried before, and I think all of these will involve making stuff from scratch. As you can see with that piece missing, the best way we can go about fixing that is just to make it completely anew. Same with the broken piece on Bumblebee's foot, and somehow again replace this Brawn's foot. So let's just get on with it. Let's start with Bumblebee first, because I think this might be the easiest one to do. As you can see here, as I showed you, one of the clips on the sort of foot has snapped away, and that means that when you sort of move his foot around, it's actually quite easy to get this foot to sort of fall off. You can see I can take that foot off quite easily, and there you can see the problem. We've got a hook on one side which is a little bit damaged but is holding in place. It looks like it's also pinged out of a hole there. Yeah, I think that needs a bit of sort of reshaping, but really the problem is that we are missing the hook on this side. So first thing is we'll take this apart, and then we'll try and see if we can make something that matches that out of some 1mm styrene sheet. And it looks like there's enough space on this right hand side that we can stick a piece on and then sort of reinforce it by sticking something underneath as well. And I think that will be how we'll do it. Once the styrene's in place, we can then paint it to match, but initially we've got to make something that is this shape or copies that shape perfectly. And I think that should be possible. So let's take this apart. We just have to undo the one screw here, and then these two pieces should come apart quite easily. Yeah, so you can see that little post is bent as well. I'll straighten that up. The easiest way to do that is just to drop it in some hot water for a minute, some just freshly boiled water. That will warm up, and then I can bend it back into shape. I'll do that quickly off camera. There's no point in showing that one again. But what we're going to have to do is trace this shape onto some styrene and then try and cut that out. I think that will be possible. So let's get that cut, and we'll see what we can do. So what I've got is this is some 1mm styrene sheet. You can pick this up at most model shops, and I've just cut a small piece off the edge because it's easier to work with smaller pieces. And what I'm going to do is just sort of hold this onto the side there so that I can then trace that original shape out onto the sheet, and then we can cut it out. All we're going to do is try and duplicate that piece and then maybe add some reinforcement along the edge of it. So first thing to do is to cut that shape. So yeah, get a pencil, I'm going to hold those two pieces together and try and trace it as best I can. It's not easy because you can't actually rest this on a flat surface, but actually probably I can rest it on a flat surface if I just do that. Yeah, that will work. So if I just hold these two pieces together, I can trace around it It's not the perfect trace, as you can see, but that will be enough that we can cut this out and then start fine tuning it with some plastic nippers and some files. Okay, after a few minutes work, you can see I've managed to create this, which is my sort of mirror image of that broken hook. What I've done is I've also stuck a little piece of extra styrene on the back of it, just with some plastic weld, because it needed a little bit more sort of reinforcement. And actually on this side, there's plenty of space. It's not going to rub on any other part of the toy. So you can see my plan now is to trim this post down, and we can insert that inside the front part of Bumblebee and glue it in place, and that will hook on quite nicely. So just going to trim off the end of this. The reason I'm doing a sort of excess amount of this styrene is just to give it some extra support. You want as much strength really in this piece as I possibly can get, because it's quite a small piece. You can see that's what it's going to look like once it's all glued in place, and I'm hoping that will have enough strength there to hold the foot on quite firmly. So let's attach this to the front of Bumblebee. The plastic used on these transformers will work very well with plastic weld. I've shown this many times before now on this channel. So what we've got to do is we'll get a bit of plastic weld on a brush. I'm just going to brush it on the inside of Bumblebee here, just where I need the piece to attach to, and then I'm going to sort of hold this in place and move it around until I've got it just where I want it. You can use a knife or a pair of tweezers or something just to sort of rearrange this and get everything lined up properly. At the moment that's a little bit low, so let's nudge that up a sec. I think that is going to be about right. It's not quite perfect, but I'm hoping it will be close enough that it will work. I've just quickly screwed the foot of Bumblebee back together so we can check everything fits together, and you can see there's the new piece of plastic that slides quite nicely inside the body of Bumblebee when he's in car mode, so that does work. And when we slide this leg out, we can now pull the foot out. I'm going to be a little bit more sort of careful with this because I don't want to break what I've just fixed. So you can see that pulls into that position and then rotates round and is now held in place quite properly by this new hook. If we compare that to the other side foot, you just slide that out of the way, you can see how that one is held in place. It may be a little bit looser, so I might do a bit of modification to it, but that does work quite nicely. And the foot's no longer going to be able to fall off. So I think, although it's not a perfect fix, that is doing quite a nice job. I think I've got a slight angle to my piece there, so it needs to be rotated down a little bit or sort of bent slightly, but overall that works really well. So I'll just give this a quick coat of paint. I've got some yellow that will match near enough to this, and really you're not going to notice it anyway because it's sort of hidden behind the rest of his foot. While waiting for the paint to dry, I also took the opportunity just to replace the two stickers on the front of both Bumblebee and Cliff Jumper, so they already look a whole lot better. Now the last thing I need to do on Bumblebee is fix his very loose arms. You can see here, if I wiggle this figure around, that the arms are incredibly loose, or that the right one is, because I've already tightened this one. You can see this stays in place very nicely, and it's a very easy thing to do. what you need is some shearing elastic. This is cheap stuff that you can get from most sort of haberdashery shops. A roll like this I think costs about 99p and there's hundreds of meters on it. So I've just cut off a small amount of the shearing elastic. All I'm going to do is wrap that around the joint. So we wrap that around a few times and you'll immediately feel that it starts to sort of stiffen up. And then what I've got to do is tie a quick knot into the shearing elastic. We'll tie a couple of knots so that it stays in place. Trim the ends off and that's it. Then that arm will stay nicely in place. So I've just got some, I'll use my plastic nippers. I forgot to get some scissors out, so I'll just trim those ends off the plastic nippers. You can't really even see that there is elastic in there. So now you can see that I can rotate his arm and it stays exactly where I want it to be, and we can actually pose Bumblebee properly. I'll show you the little bit of plastic now that it's been painted. Really quite hard to tell that that has even been fixed and his foot no longer falls away. So that's Bumblebee all done, and we can take a look at Brawn.
Toy-polloi.
Here are the two Brawn figures. This one is in very nice condition, doesn't actually need anything doing to it, but this one that I picked up at a car boot sale has some issues. You can see that one of his feet has snapped off. It's actually the sort of the front bumper of the vehicle, but one of the side of it has snapped away. Again, I think we can just use a piece of styrene sheet cut and sort of shaped and then glued in place. It looks like there's a little bit sort of more damage to the top, so we might have to rebuild part of it. But overall, I reckon I can make something that looks pretty much like that. It's going to be a little bit fiddly, but this should be able to sort of cut something and then stick it in place and then a bit of paint. The harder part is his hand. You can see here that this hand has snapped off, but the hands are very simple. It's just this sort of square shape with a little bit cut out of the middle of it. So it's a bit thicker plastic, so I do have some 2mm styrene sheet, or maybe I just stick 2 bits of the 1mm sheet together, and then we can attach that on here. It's not a particularly neat break, so I might have to sort of build that up again with a bit of styrene, but it should be possible. Now, to get Brawn apart is a little bit fiddly, just because he's got a screw in the back of him here, but it's sort of held together, I think I remember, with a bit of glue or something at the front, so the front section is actually quite awkward to get apart. You can split the plastic just with a knife or something, but I think for this fix we don't need to worry about doing that. So I'll just take the screw off the back and we can remove the spare wheel, and then that allows the body to open up enough that we can remove the legs. You can see those fall out quite easily, and that means that I can sort of work on this leg separately, and I'm hoping that I can also take this arm out in the same manner. Yes, there you go, so that has come out. Take the other side out as well, and we can leave that body together. You can see here that there's a clip at the top, but it's also sort of glued, or maybe even just the plastic as well, is together over the years as these sort of plastics degrade a bit. So I'm going to leave that body as one piece and not bother trying to take that apart. But you can see now we can get access to the hand and the arm. Again, you can actually remove this arm from this sort of side panel just by unclipping it, but I'm not going to bother doing that either, because sometimes this plastic gets a bit brittle and there's no need to, now that I can sort of access all of this. There's no point in sort of taking things apart and risking it, and I can also use this side here to make a template from. So let's leave these pieces as they are. I think the first thing to do though, let's try and recreate this front panel here, the missing piece of the bumper. So again, we're going to be using the 1mm styrene, and I've already cut a few little pieces just because this is not a very neat break on the front. I'm going to sort of have to make this piece up as I go along, so I've made a piece that's got a slight sort of bit sticking a bit higher. It should work, and then I've got another piece to stick over the top of that to build up the shape. You can see this has a slight taper to the edges of it, and I think by the time I've layered those two pieces together and stuck them onto here, we'll be able to get something that does actually look quite nice. As you can see, this is not a particularly clean break, so I'm just sort of not fudging it, but just, you know, sort of making it as I go along and modifying it. I'll do a little bit of sanding on these pieces, trying to get them to look quite right, and then we'll attach them. But I think, again, once that's in place and sanded down and painted, we'll end up with something that does look really quite good. So I'll just get on with it and get building. with that base piece stuck in place. It's not too firmly held on, but it's certainly held on quite well. I'm going to let everything set for quite a long while anyway before I do any sort of fine tuning. I've put another little bit of support styrene just in the back there, but it needs a bit of trimming down once it has fully set. So I've made the next piece, which is this top section, which needs to stick over the top of that, just to give it some sort of extra definition. You can see on the original it's got this little tapered edge, so I've tried to match that as best I can. So I'm going to stick this over the top, we'll let everything set, and then we'll do some fine tuning. But you can see that overall that's pretty good. I think by the time we paint that up and sort of do a little bit of fine tuning, that will look pretty good, and it will also mean that Brawn can then stand again, because at the moment he can't. So let's get this piece stuck in place again. I'm just using plastic weld. The plastic of these transformers seems to react very nicely with plastic weld, so it gives a good firm bonding. So I'll just put some on the front of this, like so, and then we'll drop this sort of angled, tapered edged piece over the top of it. Like so. We can measure that that is about the right length. I've made it slightly sort of longer, so I've got a little bit of leeway to trim this down at the end. But overall, it's the right sort of shape and proportions. You can see that's what we've ended up with. It's not too bad at all, just some fine tuning once everything's dried, and I think that will work very nicely. Here's the bumper now that it's dried and I've done a little bit more sanding to it. You can see that that's a fairly good sort of recreation of the shape of the original bumper. It's got about the right thickness, so by the time we've painted that up into a sort of army green, I think that will look pretty nice. We can now sort of move on to the claw, and I've already started work on it. Again, I'm just cutting this out of the 1mm styrene sheet, so I've sort of traced this on. You can see that this is my tracing, and I'm now just slowly cutting it out, just using a knife. This is 1mm sheet, so what I'm going to do is cut one out, and then I'm going to stick that onto another piece, and I'll cut that out. I've just left an extra bit on one side so it's easier to hold, and I think that by the time we've got those two bits together, that's going to be about the right thickness. It may be, actually that's about 3mm, so I'm actually going to have to do that another 2 times to make this just thick enough. And then we can attach it to the broken arm. Now the broken arm on this one, it's got a slight angle to it, so I've just stuck a piece of styrene on it just temporarily, which I will then sort of shape and file down to it so we can get a nice flat surface, and that's what we'll attach this new claw to. But really I've just got to start getting this cut to the right shape. It's a fairly slow job, but I think we can get something that's going to look pretty good. And this is what I've been able to make. So this is 3 layers of 1mm styrene, sort of cut to the right shape. As you can see, I've still got this extra piece on just so that I can hold it, and I've managed to make something that is going to do the job, I think. By the time we cover that in some Molotow chrome pen, it'll look quite nice. I'm going to do a little bit more fine tuning now, just some sort of careful cutting and trimming. I will then trim off this extra piece, and we can attach it back to this. It's going to be a very weak joint because it's only onto a 1mm thick piece of styrene, but I think it should hold. So let me do the final bits of fine tuning on this and tidying up, and we'll stick it onto here, and we can paint it up and make sure it sort of matches as close as we can get. I'm now ready to stick this in place. So that is the replacement claw. I need to make sure it's round the right way. It needs to be a mirror image of the one that's not broken here. So I've filed this down as well, just tidied it up, and we're going to stick that onto there. Might need a little bit more filing just to get the angle just about perfect. So I'm going to just file that down a little bit. I think that should be fine now. So let's just go for it. No turning back. So we'll get a bit of plastic weld onto there, and I've got to remember it's off to one side. It's got to go like that. I hope. Nope, done that the wrong way round. I knew I'd get this wrong. Like that. Yeah, that way round. Sometimes you make mistakes, that's just how these things go. Let's put it on this side this time. So, like that. Yep, that's correct. There you go. You can see that now matches. Always best to double check these things. So yeah, they are round the right way. I'll just do a little bit more sort of plastic weld around the edge of that. We'll let everything dry, and then I'll get some monochrome pen and put that over the whole of that, and it should look, I would say, half decent. For the green on the front of Brawn, I'm going to be using some Humbrol acrylics. I've just found this one in my sort of pot of paints, number 30. It seems to be a military green, and I think it's going to match quite nicely. I've not mixed it with anything else. Quite often I have to mix colours to sort of match, but maybe this is a standard green colour. Yeah, it looks a remarkably good match. I'm just going to go with that. This is a matte finish paint, so I'll paint it on and I'll then put a sort of clear top coat over the top just to try and make it sort of match the shininess of the original plastic. But actually you can see straight away that hides the plastic incredibly well. It's a remarkably good match. Sometimes you just get lucky with paints. Normally I have to mix them, but on this instance that just seems to work. And for the chromed claw, we are going to be using Molotow liquid chrome. I've shown this quite a few times in Transformers restorations. It's great stuff. Just make sure to shake it really well before you use it, and also let it dry for as long as we possibly can, because it dulls if you touch it when it hasn't dried. But you can see I can put this onto the bit of the claw that I've just made, and immediately that makes it look much more like it should do. So I'll quickly go and chrome the rest of this, let it dry for as long as I can, and we'll put Brawn back together. And here are the final figures. This is how Brawn looks now. As you can see, that replacement hand, although not perfect, really, I don't think most people would even notice that that had been made from scratch. And likewise the foot as well. You can see that does match really quite nicely. And it means that he now actually stands up and can be displayed in robot mode. He's not the greatest of figures, we all know that. It's a very sort of really poorly done version of the cartoon character, but it's all we've got. So you sort of have to learn to love it. I certainly have a love-hate relationship with it. I think it's an awful figure, but I didn't want to leave it broken, so it's worth putting the effort in. And likewise you can see how Bumblebee now stands up quite nicely, and the little repair there really is hardly noticeable because it does look a lot like the original one on that side, and it means that his foot no longer falls off, and also we can pose his arms because they are now nice and stiff. So Bumblebee is very displayable as well. I've just quickly transformed Brawn back into car mode so you can see how well the front sort of bumper now works. It's really quite convincing, considering that it's just a piece of styrene painted green. I think that makes him a very displayable little figure, and I think I only ended up paying something like 50p for him at this car boot sale. So for 50p and a sort of half hour to an hour's work, I've got a very nice little transformer there. So I hope this video has been of interest to you. If it has, then make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the bell to be notified each time I upload a new video. And thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.